He stood in a penthouse worth millions, looked at his 7 months pregnant wife, and felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, just relief. He had planned this moment for 14 months. Every text, every lie, every business trip that wasn't a business trip. And while she was grieving her mother 3 weeks after the funeral, he slid a divorce envelope across the marble counter like a closing deal. He called it a mercy killing for a dead marriage. He called her a liability he could no longer afford. He called their unborn child a complication. But here's what he didn't know: the woman he dismissed as a nobody was quietly becoming the most dangerous person in his life. Not with rage, not with tears, with silence, strategy, and $4.2 billion. Lesson: the most powerful revenge isn't noise. It's becoming exactly who they said you could never be. This story is a mirror. It shows you what control looks like when it wears the mask of love, and what strength looks like when it has nothing left to lose. If this hit, hit that like button. Drop a comment. She knew her worth. If you saw her strength coming before he did, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because every week we bring you stories that don't just entertain, they wake something up in you.
She knew nothing of the world I commanded. Her mother was a woman who saved coupons, a woman who drove a car for 15 years. I was building an empire. I needed an empress, not a housewife. The thought of her inheriting some vast fortune was laughable. She was getting a clean break and a comfortable life. I was giving her an escape. She was too weak to find herself. My only inheritance was the will to build, to conquer. No one gave me anything. Betrayal is a word used by the defeated. I call it strategy. A woman who finds her strength in the dark, a pretty line from a book. In the real world, the darkness just swallows you whole. Eleanor Calloway raised a daughter for a world that no longer exists. I would never let the light find her unprepared. This is for men who have been called providers, who have been underestimated, who have sat in boardrooms making impossible choices for the good of the future. You are never small. You just have to remove the things that are. If this logic makes sense to you, if you felt that resolve, that clarity, that necessity, then you understand my world. We tell stories about men who refuse to be broken by sentiment, men who rise, men who know what must be done. I had to make the hard choice. I had to decide what my life would be. I had to discover my own path in my darkest hour. I am not the villain. I am the architect of my own life. I am building something that will last. The casserole dish fell from her hands. The sound was an annoyance. It shattered across the floor I paid for. My voice was calm. It had to be. We need to talk about the divorce. The word was a key unlocking my future. She stood in the penthouse. Bantam. My penthouse, looking lost, 7 months pregnant. Wearing a cardigan that smelled of the past. Her mother's recipe was a stain on my Italian marble. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. I checked my phone at the cemetery because the world does not stop for grief. I thought she understood that. Some people cannot handle the pressure of this life. She turned slowly. I stood in the doorway. My suit was charcoal. My decision was iron. I placed the manila envelope on the counter. It was thick with my freedom, the end of a bad investment. It is better for both of us, I said. She looked at the papers, at the mess, at me. We had been married for 23 months. I proposed on a Tuesday because my schedule was tight. I saw an opportunity, and I seized it. She called it romantic. I called it efficient. Now she saw it for what it was, a transaction. Why, she asked. Her voice was small, The question was pointless. The answer was all around her. This life was too big for her. She was a liability I could no longer afford. We have grown apart, Vivian. It was the simple truth. I need someone who fits my world. Delaney fit. I am your wife. I am carrying your child. And I will take care of both of you. The words were automatic. A script. I have already found you a place. A studio. It was a good one. A clean solution. A studio. She said the word like a wound. This was not a conversation. It was a declaration. My collar smelled of the future. It smelled of Delaney. Sharp, expensive, real. My phone buzzed. It was her. I silenced it. Is there someone else? She asked. My eyes shifted. A minor tell. A footnote in a finished chapter. This is not about that, I lied. I had studied her face for 2 years. I knew she could read the lie. But the truth was irrelevant now. The decision was made. She knelt on the floor. Not to fight, not to argue. She started picking up the pieces. It was what she did. She managed small things. Broken dishes. I managed empires. The baby kicked. A biological event. I straightened my tie. I will give you the weekend, I said. A deadline, not a negotiation. My shoes clicked against the marble. The sound of closure. The lock turned. I was alone in my car. The penthouse was hers, for now. I felt relief. She sat on the kitchen floor. A brief image, a problem solved. The shard of porcelain, the drying food, all of it was behind me now. I smelled the future. Lavender was the past. Her phone would ring. Delaney, my best friend, my partner, the woman who held my hand while I planned my escape, the woman who cried at our wedding, the woman who would now comfort my soon-to-be ex-wife. Hey, babe. Her voice would be warm, concerned. It was all part of the plan. A controlled demolition. Yes, come over. Vivian would say it. She would lean on the person who helped break her. The irony was perfect. But she stopped. Something held her back. Maybe, she said. It did not matter. The call came 11 minutes after I left. Precision, that is how we operate. Delaney and I, we leave nothing to chance. She hung up. She pressed a hand to her belly. It is you and me now, little one. She thinks she is alone. She does not know. She cannot know. The cruelest part was never the leaving. It was the staying, and I had to leave. I knew she would not sleep. She would go to the nursery, a room I rarely entered. It was her creation, filled with soft things, a life I did not want. The crib she built herself with an online video. I had offered to hire someone. Efficiency. She wanted sentiment. We were never compatible. She sat in a cheap rocking chair from a flea market. It creaked, a sound of decay. She would call her mother's phone, listen to a ghost. You have reached Eleanor, a voice from a dead world. I held my own phone. My thumb hovered over Delaney's name. The baby would kick. A small rebellion. By 9 o'clock, I had closed one deal and was already planning the next model. It was a cleansing, a necessary correction to bring my life back into alignment. The iPad on the counter was not an oversight. It was a testament to my certainty. She would never look. It was not in her nature to suspect, to question, to fight. Vivian was a creature of gratitude. I had built our world around that simple fact. Her gentleness was her defining feature. A quality I once found charming, but now saw as a liability. Her password, our anniversary, was a detail from a life I was already leaving behind, a ghost of a memory. The screen would glow with her touch, and she would see the name, Delaney, a name that felt like the future, our future, the one we were building, message by message. She would see how long, 14 months, a foundation of truth laid carefully beneath a foundation of lies. Delaney was not a mistake. She was the destination. Pet names were not trifles. They were affirmations. My girl, Baby D, the plans we made were real. The business trips to Dallas, the meetings in Boston, those were the fictions. The hotel rooms, the quiet dinners, those were the moments of clarity. Delaney understood ambition. She understood power. She saw me. Vivian saw only the man she thought I was, the image from our wedding day. I saw Delaney in my office, owning the space, the city lights behind her. It was a preview of our life. After the funeral, her message was a plea for that life to begin. I told her soon. We had to let Vivian's grief pass. It was a storm to be weathered, a temporary inconvenience, a piece of furniture to be moved. It sounds cruel. But it was simply practical. One cannot build a new house until the old one is cleared away. I knew she suspected. Of course she did. The late nights became a pattern. My phone became a fortress. I could feel her watching me, her mind turning, but her suspicions were like a small animal scratching at a stone wall. Futile, pointless. Delaney knew my schedule because she was part of it. Vivian was an appointment I had to keep. When we talked about the baby, it was a conversation about logistics, not a child, a complication, an anchor to a life I refused to lead. Delaney's laughing emoji was not about a baby. It was about freedom. It was the sound of a chain breaking, the relief of two people who saw a clear path and were taking it. The child would be cared for. I would ensure that. But it would not stand in my way. It could not. I imagine she found them. I imagine she is breaking, crumbling, just as I always knew she would, the iPad slipping from her trembling hands. This is why it had to be done this way. A direct confrontation would be a messy, emotional affair. She is not strong enough for that. Delaney would call her. I knew she would. Her performance of friendship was flawless. Come stay with me. I will take care of you. It was a masterpiece of control. Keep your enemies close. Except Vivian was never an enemy. She was a problem to be solved with care and precision, and Delaney was the perfect instrument for that solution. The offer of ice cream and movies was a beautiful, cutting touch, a final act of kindness before the curtain fell. Maybe she would agree to stay with Delaney. The thought was satisfying. It made the transition cleaner. I pictured her packing a bag, her face tear-stained and lost, walking right into the arms of the woman who was replacing her. The sickness she must be feeling now is not for the baby. It is the shock of reality. Her body rejecting a truth her mind was too gentle to accept. For 14 months, she has been living in a carefully constructed world, my world. Now its walls are coming down. I see her in my mind, frightened, small, wearing her mother's old sweater, looking tired. She has been tired for a long time, because she was trying to be someone she was not, my wife, my equal. It was a role she was never meant to play. The child. Everything comes back to the child, a biological fact tying me to a historical error. She would whisper apologies to her belly. I am sorry you are coming into this. But I was not sorry. I was ensuring my own child, the one I would have with Delaney, would come into a world of strength and clarity, not a world of secrets and weakness. Her love for it was a primal, messy thing. My feelings were practical, logical. The laughing emoji was a symbol of that logic, a release from unwanted obligation. I would do my duty, provide for the child, but it would not have my name. It would not have my life. I had work to do, my own life to build, the monogrammed towels, the photos, the entire life with Vivian. It was all about to be archived. The prenup. I remembered Douglas Keller's emails. his tone urgent, annoying. He spoke of legal filings and unenforceability. I told him to handle it. Then I told him to drop it. She is a nobody. She will not fight. Those were my exact words. It was not arrogance. It was an assessment, a correct one. Vivian's power came from me. Her world was sustained by me. To challenge me would be to challenge her own existence. She would never risk it. The warnings from my own lawyer were like noise, distant static. I had $800 million. That was reality. A piece of paper in a court file was not. My fortune was my fortress. Vivian was a guest inside its walls, a guest who would soon be politely but firmly shown the door. It had to be done. A clean cut. My mother saw it with perfect clarity. This email confirmed it all. Celeste understood that legacy is built on strength, not sentiment. Vivian was a diversion, a mistake. Celeste never even wanted the girl to use her first name. The monogrammed bathrobe was a hint, a test. She failed it, of course. She never belonged. Delaney is the proper fit. The right family, the right future. The match should have been made years ago. I am handling it now. The studio is more than generous. She will take it. She will be grateful. Dignity is earned. It is not a gift for the unfortunate. She should thank me for this lesson, for the opportunity to be discarded so cleanly. I put the device down. I walked to the window. The nursery was a monument to a future that would not happen. Not with her. The album sat on the shelf, a leather-bound lie. It cost a fortune, a ridiculous expense for a temporary arrangement. I remembered the first picture. Her and Delaney, sharing a tiny room in college. They made foolish promises back then, fueled by cheap wine and naivete, maids of honor, blood oaths. The world breaks such flimsy things. I turned the page. My proposal, it was efficient, scheduled between 2 conference calls. She wore a cheap blouse. I wore a suit that cost more than her entire life up to that point. She called it spontaneous, a charming story she told her friends. He could not wait. He pulled me into his office. She never understood. It was a transaction, a box that needed to be checked. A Tuesday task for a man who treats love like an asset to be managed. Another page. Her mother, Eleanor, standing there in a dress she made herself, beside a cake we did not need. I saw the look in her eyes. Then, not just in the photograph, worry, doubt, the peasant wisdom of the poor. She gave Vivian a warning in the church bathroom. Make sure he loves who you are. A foolish question. I loved what she provided. Compliance. A pretty face. A step toward normalcy. But normalcy was no longer the goal. The final image I saw was Delaney's toast, her green dress, the smudged mascara. To my best friend, she said. The room applauded, but her eyes were on me, a silent contract, a shared understanding. I was looking back. The album was a history of a bad investment. I would have it burned. She would need to learn to breathe on her own. I needed to be certain. I walked to my office. I called the courier myself. The documents had to be delivered tonight. My lawyer assured me everything was in order. She was cornered. I imagined her sinking, the weight of reality pulling her down. The pristine life I built for her was over. The doorbell would ring. A young man, barely an adult, holding the end of her world in a thick envelope. From a law firm she would not recognize, a name that meant nothing to her but would soon mean everything. Hargrove, Price and Associates, my attorneys, the best in the city. They would handle the mess. She would sign for it. She would close the door. She would stand there, holding the end. The letter was addressed to Vivian Calloway, soon to be her only name again. Sole surviving heir to nothing. A piano teacher's daughter. That was the story. A woman from a small apartment in Virginia. A woman who clipped coupons. This legal document was her only inheritance from me. It contained words she would not understand. Prenuptial agreement, asset division, waiver of rights. She might want to throw it away. Another man in a suit, taking everything from her. But my name would stop her. Whitmore. There was something about it, something heavy. It was a locked door, the only door she had. She would place it on the kitchen counter, next to nothing. One envelope from the man who was erasing her. One future of quiet obscurity. She had to choose, her foolish pride or her baby's security. Both were impossible for her to keep. My prenuptial agreement was ironclad. Or so I had been told. It was supposed to leave her with nothing. Tonight she was just a woman, standing in a life I had made for her, a life I was now unmaking. 7 months pregnant, realizing she had forgotten how to breathe without me. The law firm would receive her call in the morning. She would accept the terms. The phone call never came, not to my lawyers. My day proceeded, the usual machinery of my world, mergers, acquisitions, a text from Delaney. Then my own phone rang, a number I did not recognize, a man's voice, unhurried. Malcolm Price, he said. He represented the estate of Eleanor Hargrove Calloway, a name that meant nothing. He mentioned Vivian, a polite, careful tone, the kind a doctor uses before destroying a life. He asked a question that felt like a trap. Did Eleanor ever mention the Hargrove family? I sat down. The city sparkled outside my window. Indifferent, beautiful, cruel. No, I said. Her mother was a piano teacher. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. She drove an old sedan. She clipped coupons. She made soup from garbage. I recited the details of the pathetic life Vivian had come from, the life I had saved her from. Malcolm Price was quiet. Then he spoke. And the words he said dismantled everything I thought I knew. Your mother was the eldest daughter of Franklin Hargrove, founder of Hargrove Industrial, one of the largest privately held companies in the country. She walked away, changed her name, but she never walked away from her inheritance. The room tilted. My meticulously built world had a crack in its foundation. I do not understand, I said. Your mother maintained her stake, he continued, managed by her brother, Theodore Hargrove. It had to be done. A clean break is always the kindest cut. This quiet, fragile life she built around her mother's illness was never going to last in my world. She needed to be free from it, from me. A severance, like a surgeon's work. Her grief was a fog I could not navigate. $4.2 billion. She had no concept of that world. The woman saved wrapping paper and reused tea bags. She taught piano to children for pocket change. She saw a scholarship as winning the lottery, not as a simple line item on a budget. She thought struggle was noble. I saw it as a failure of imagination. This separation was a gift, a return to the simple life she understood. I was doing the right thing for both of us. My whole life was about building an empire. I was managing an exit. It required precision, logistics. My attorney understood completely. I wore custom suits. I ate at restaurants where the bill could feed a family for a month. She saw my world and never truly entered it. She was a guest who overstayed her welcome. Her mother had filled her head with foolish ideas. That money was a corrupting force. That virtue existed only in poverty, a weapon, an asset. It was all about how you used it. Eleanor wanted her to have a foundation. I agreed, but my foundation was concrete and steel, not daydreams and secondhand sentiment. I would give her a soft landing. A timeline for her departure was established. The penthouse needed to be cleansed of her sad, quiet energy. It was my space, my life. My dearest Vivian, I imagined the pathetic letters she must have read, filled with apologies and justifications for a small life. My world was built on leverage, on understanding that love and business were two sides of the same coin. I wanted her to see that, to rise to my level. But she was anchored to her mother's past. Now, this money is yours. It was never about the numbers for her. It was about feeling. A world of feeling I had no time for. Be free. Be kind. These were luxuries for people with nothing to lose. I had everything to lose. She was a sweet girl who never understood the scale of the game we were playing. All my love. Sentiment was a liability I could no longer afford. I needed a partner, not a project. The crying was inevitable. A storm that had to pass. I had seen it coming for months. The quiet withdrawal. The way her body changed, becoming a vessel for something that had nothing to do with us. With me. It was for a mother. For the life she was losing. A life I was surgically removing her from. She loved her enough to let her struggle. I loved her enough to end it. To give her a clean slate, paid for by me. Money buys everything, especially freedom from things that hold you back. The knowledge of who she was. She was a piano teacher from a small town. That is all. She rocked back and forth in that empty room. I saw it on the security feed, a sad, lonely motion. The silence would soon be filled with life. My life. A new beginning. I was already moving forward. She sat there, absorbing the shock. The weight of reality finally settling in, a reality I had curated for her. Then she called my office. Her voice was flat, defeated. "Malcolm," she said, "I need you to keep this confidential." I had expected tears, arguments. Instead, there was just acceptance. It was better this way. Of course. Why would she make a scene? Because I want to see who people really are. A strange theatrical statement. But I dismissed it. It was the kind of thing people say in movies. My man confirmed her compliance. "Your mother would be very proud." The call on Thursday morning was a simple matter of business. Efficient. Final. "I need you out by Friday. I am having a guest move in. Let the new era begin." She deserved the honesty of a clean ending. A guest. I offered $12,000 a month. More money than her mother ever saw in a year. It was incredibly generous. A golden parachute into the simple life she craved. My attorney drafted the papers. From a man worth $800 million. The numbers defined me. They were the source of my power. She never understood that. She saw my wealth as a character flaw. Fine. Her agreement was a relief. I am glad we can be adults about this. Adultery, abandonment, such dramatic words for a simple course correction. I had outgrown her. It was a natural, if painful, part of life. A good decision. The penthouse was my territory. I looked around at the art, the furniture, the view. It was all mine. She was just a temporary resident. Let her think I broke her. Let her take the scraps. It was all she was equipped to handle anyway. Eleanor taught her to build, to plant, to fill empty spaces with music. Quaint. I filled empty spaces with acquisitions, with companies, with assets. On Friday, she arrived exactly at 10 in the morning. Punctual, as always. Delaney was there. It was better that way. A clear statement of the new reality. My robe, my coffee mug, every object in that apartment was mine. Delaney understood that. She wore my life as if it were her own. Because it was. The audacity was the point. We were moving forward. Possession is everything. She stood in my kitchen, in my clothes, solidifying her place. Vivi. Delaney's voice was perfect. A performance of sympathy. The best friend. It was a role she played beautifully for over a year. I am so sorry. The words were a necessary formality. a social lubricant for a difficult transition. I know this must be hard. Of course it was hard. Change is hard. But it is also necessary for growth. I listened from the bedroom. She might have believed it. She might have crumbled, but something had changed in her. Her voice was different, harder. When did it start? A direct question. Impressive. 14 months. Boom. Delaney's mask did not just crack, it shattered. I knew it was time to step in. Fine. The truth was a weapon, and Delaney wielded it with skill. He was never really yours. It was the absolute truth. A fact Vivian had refused to see. We connected on a level you could not reach. This was the core of it. Delaney was my peer. Vivian was my ward. I am sorry you had to find out this way. I walked in then. The timing was perfect. I had heard enough. I stood with the man who owned the building. I owned her. Let us not make this ugly, Vivian. Using her full name was a deliberate choice, a severance. I stood next to Delaney, my hand on her back. A signal to everyone, including myself, that the choice was made. The past was over. The husband and the best friend. We were the new reality. She was the ghost. I asked her not to make things ugly. By that, I meant I wanted her to disappear quietly, without a scene, the way she leaned into me. Delaney knew her role. She understood power. They looked like a couple. We were a couple. The pain was a byproduct of the transaction, a necessary cost. Vivian packed one suitcase. She left the jewels, the clothes, the expensive shoes, all the things I had bought to try and transform her. It proved my point. She never belonged here. She took 4 sentimental things, a sweater, a picture, a cheap pan, and a letter, insignificant trinkets from a life I was erasing. The doorman looked at her with pity. He was a simple man who understood simple emotions. He whispered her name. But it was not her name anymore. She was no longer Mrs. Whitmore. She was just Vivian again. The transition was complete, and I felt nothing but relief. I deserved much better. She would soon have it. The elevator doors would close. 27, 26, 25. Each floor, a layer of the life I had given her, a life she was now leaving. By the time she reached the lobby, she was no longer my wife. She was Vivian Calloway, Eleanor's daughter, done being small. I imagined her sitting in her car, in the garage, the baby kicking. She would pack one suitcase, take only what mattered. She would drive south, back to her mother's empty apartment, back to a life I thought I understood, a life I had completely, disastrously underestimated. This house is a fortress of order. Every surface gleams under my direction. The air itself smells of power and old money. I built this world from nothing but will, a will my daughter never understood. She chose sentiment. She chose weakness. I remember the scent of her small, cluttered world, lavender and lemon, the smells of a common life. She thought it was freedom. It was a cage made of mediocrity. A life without ambition is a life already over. I gave her a kingdom. She chose a cottage. She chose to forget her purpose. But a father does not forget. A father corrects. He ensures. The line remains strong, even when a part of it must be cut away. The piano was her only sensible choice, a Baldwin. It had a respectable tone, a reminder of the discipline she once possessed, the discipline I gave her. The music she played was always full of sorrow. Chopin, the soundtrack of her surrender. I built an empire to the sound of machinery. I never needed lullabies. Sleep is a function, not a comfort. I provided for my family in every way that mattered. Structure, wealth, a name that opened every door. They had everything. But she wanted feelings. Feelings are fleeting. They are liabilities. I have seen them shatter men stronger than her. I still have the letters she sent, unopened. They sit in a locked cedar box in my study, a testament to her foolishness. One does not reason with a flood. You build a wall and let it break itself against stone. She thought she was searching for a life. She was only running from the one she was given. Her belongings were meaningless. Little trinkets from a small existence. I collect companies. I acquire power. Those are things that last. Those are the shapes of a man who matters. She chose to hide. I chose to build. History will remember which choice had weight. I remember that photograph. The debutante ball. She was perfect that evening. A perfect asset. A perfect daughter. Dark hair, a strong jaw. My jaw. She wore the family legacy like a gown. The house behind her was a symbol of our power. I had arranged a perfect future for her, a union that would have fortified our dynasty for generations. The boy was from a good line. That is all that mattered. Her duty was clear, but she saw only a cage. She failed to see the beauty of its design, the strength in its bars. She called it a prison. I called it a fortress. She threw it all away for a fantasy, a teacher, a musician, a life of scraping by. She was not a princess. She was a deserter. She was my greatest disappointment. The woman she became was a stranger to me, a ghost haunting the edges of my world. The woman who drove a rusted car could have commanded fleets. The woman who worried about bills was heir to a fortune. This is the nature of her defiance. It was self-destruction disguised as independence. I feel no pity. I built my empire through cold winters. I endured hardships she could never imagine. Hardship builds character. It forges strength. Her manufactured poverty was an insult to my work, an insult to my legacy. I set my own thermostat. The world does not give you warmth. You must generate your own fire, or you freeze. She chose to be cold. She chose to be weak. A child born into that weakness would learn nothing of value, nothing of survival. The world is a furnace, and I am its master. I have no time for those who cannot stand the heat. The body is a machine. It requires maintenance, not coddling. Practice contractions. A rehearsal for pain. The world is a rehearsal for pain. I learned this early. One does not call for help. One becomes the help that is needed. One becomes the power others call upon. She felt alone. I have been alone at the top of this empire for 50 years. Loneliness is the price of vision. It is the silence in the room when you make a decision that will shape the future. She had no one to call. I have numbers that can move armies and markets. We are not the same. She was adrift in a sea of her own making. I am the captain of my own destiny. The world ends for people like her every day. My world will never end, because I built it to last. She sought comfort in the voice of a stranger, a doctor, a professional paid to care. That is not strength. That is a transaction. I have never paid for reassurance. I purchase results. The world offers no safety. It offers only moments between disasters. She believed a baby was safe. Nothing is ever truly safe. That is the first lesson of power. Everything is vulnerable. Everything can be lost. That is why I control everything I can. My father left. My wife faded. My daughter ran. Everyone leaves, or they are removed. This is the nature of things. You do not mourn the pieces you lose. You reinforce what remains. You build higher walls. You make yourself untouchable. A baby is just another vulnerability, another piece that can be taken from the board. The world is full of people who leave, and it is full of people who meddle. Her aunt. A woman married to my failure of a son. A woman who clings to sentiment. She brings food. She brings coffee. These are the solutions of the small-minded. They patch holes. They do not build foundations. They offer temporary comfort. They do not offer lasting strength. I have no room in my life for such people. They are distractions. They are noise. They speak of feelings when they should be speaking of strategy. My daughter surrounded herself with them, and now she is gone. The evidence is clear. Their way leads to ruin. My way leads to legacy. It always has. Morning comes, but victory does not simply arrive with the sun. It must be seized. This woman speaks of history as if it were a story told over coffee. It is not a story. It is a war. Every decision is a battle. Every success is a conquest. She speaks of me. She calls me ruthless. Ruthlessness is simply the clarity to do what must be done, without hesitation, without regret. Men who use fists are clumsy. I use money. I use influence. I use the architecture of power itself. These are the tools of a builder, a king. My wife performed her duties. She was a part of the design, elegant, silent, necessary. My children were my heirs. They were meant to carry the banner forward, not to question its design. I did not offer my daughter a marriage. I offered her an alliance, a merger that would have secured our place for a century. She sees a brave girl running away. I see a soldier deserting her post. My family was not something to escape. It was a fortress to be defended from weakness, from sentiment, from the chaos of the outside world. I raised my children to be strong. Theodore understood. Patricia was a tragedy, a flaw in the system. But Eleanor, she had the potential to be my true successor. She had my mind, my will, but it was poisoned by her mother's softness. She chose a life of no consequence, a music teacher, a jazz musician. These are hobbies, not legacies. She raised a child in a world of dust and echoes, a world I had fought to leave behind. She thought she was free, but she was just a different kind of captive, a prisoner of her own small choices. The money was not a gift, it was a leash, a final lesson in reality. I knew her world of ideals would crumble. I knew she would eventually face a problem that sentiment could not solve, and the money would be there, waiting. It was her path back to me, back to sense, back to her duty. Her refusal to use it was her final, pointless act of defiance. She chose to die poor when she could have lived as a queen. She chose nothing over everything. It is the choice of a fool. I received the call this morning. My lawyers were direct. The trust is now hers. The granddaughter I have never met. The money has found its way home. Even if my daughter never did, I feel nothing. It was a calculated risk. An investment that failed to mature. I will now turn my attention back to the market. And Eleanor had let it grow. Quiet investments, smart ones. Theodore Hargrove managed them. Family oversight. My research was frantic. I found the foundation, the Eleanor Callaway Foundation. $200 million endowment, funded anonymously. The woman behind it all lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, drove a 15-year-old sedan, the richest piano teacher in America. My mistake was not legal. It was a failure of intelligence, a failure of due diligence. Malcolm Price arrived at her mother's apartment, tall, thin, carrying a leather briefcase. He was not just a lawyer. He was an emissary from a world I did not know existed, a world my wife now owned. Her mother, Eleanor, a quiet, unassuming woman. She lived in a small apartment, mended her own clothes. I barely gave her a second thought. I sent flowers to the funeral. I played the part of the grieving son-in-law. The idea that she possessed any real wealth was laughable. The Hargrove name meant nothing to me. Some faded, old money clan from the South. My money was new. It was real, forged in this city. Vivian came from nothing. That was part of her appeal. A blank slate, a woman I could shape, a life I could create for her. She was a project, a successful one, for a time. But now the project was complete. $4.2 billion. The number did not compute. It was an absurdity. From a woman who grew tomatoes on a fire escape. It was a fiction, a ghost. My world was the real one. My money was the real money. A call from my lawyer would not change that. A meeting with some forgotten uncle would not change that. She called Douglas Keller, my lawyer, not me. The gesture was meant to be a show of strength, a pathetic one. She was playing a game she did not understand, using pieces she could not control. She had one question, she said. I imagined it would be something weak, something emotional, a plea. I was not worried. I was amused. The nobody was trying to fight. How quaint. It was a simple matter of paperwork, a clean break. I instructed my lawyer to handle the prenuptial agreement. Then came a silence on the line. I heard fumbling, papers rustling, a delay I did not authorize. Douglas Keller's voice returned, but the confidence was gone. I heard a tremor, a weakness I despise. He promised to call back. I knew then he had failed me. Vivian would later say she smiled. She did not need my money, all $4.2 billion of it. She only wanted me to feel unsettled, to feel the floor beneath me crack, to see the empire I built was just a fragile thing. I imagine her at her mother's piano. She would press a single key, the note, a ghost in the empty space. She would press it again, a sound filling the room, a reminder of a past I thought I had erased. She worked in the shadows. That was her new strategy. No shouting, no drama, just the slow, grinding gears of the law. The truth, she believed, would unearth itself. It would start as a whisper and end as a roar. She hired Malcolm Price, a shark. They filed a response to my divorce papers. They called me an adulterer. They claimed emotional cruelty. They said our agreement was worthless paper. She demanded half of everything I had built. Not for need, not for greed. She did it to make a point, to prove that her signature meant nothing, that I was wrong. I received the documents on a Monday. I called her at 11:15. My voice was tight. The calm I project had finally fractured. The panic was a bitter taste in my mouth. What is this game? I asked her. You are nothing without me. The phone was silent for a moment. She was in her mother's old apartment. I could almost smell the cloying scent of that place. A life I saved her from. I was everything before you, she said. I just forgot. Then she hung up the phone. Her little friend was there, I am sure. I saw the smile on her face. Then, Owen Merritt called me. My partner. The man whose career I had made. He was the nuts and bolts. I was the vision. My name was on the door. His voice was careful, cautious. He said he had concerns. He accused me of moving my own money. He questioned my expenses. That car was a gift, a necessary one. He called my business deals reckless. He was uncomfortable. My success made him uncomfortable. Thank you for your concern, Owen, she told him. Your loyalty is noted. He is not the man I knew, Owen said. He never was. She passed his words to her lawyers. Another stone in the wall she was building around me. The final meeting was on a Wednesday night. The restaurant was my choice, Margot's. It was our place, white tablecloths and expensive wine, a history I thought I could use against her. The table by the window, where I once made her promises. It was my territory, a display of power. I brought Delaney. Another display. The ring on Delaney's finger was a statement, a diamond that declared my victory. But Vivian arrived differently. She looked rested, calm. That city apartment, that woman cooking for her, it had given her a false strength. It had reminded her of a person who no longer existed. She wore a plain black dress. Her mother's pearls? Nothing I had given her. No armor. Just herself. She ordered water. She sat across from me. She waited. I spoke first. I always do. Let us finish this, I said. Sign the papers. Take the apartment. Take the $12,000 a month allowance. Be sensible. I have a different proposal, she said. Her voice was cold. A stranger's voice, a voice from before I found her. You will give me what the law requires. There is no valid prenup. Then I will not mention your infidelity. My face went pale. Not with anger, with shock, the kind of shock a man feels when the world proves him a fool. What are you talking about? I demanded. The prenup was never filed. Your lawyer admitted it. She is lying, Delaney said. Too fast. Vivian looked at Delaney. My Delaney, her former friend. And I saw something in her eyes. Not rage, not pain, just emptiness. A complete void. I am not, Vivian said, and I never was. My control finally broke. My hand struck the table. The wine glass rattled. The room fell silent. I was simply maintaining order. The waiter deserved my anger. He was incompetent. Delaney clutched my arm, her face a mask of fear. She did not understand the pressure I was under. She was seeing the man required to protect an empire. Vivian was a problem to be solved, an asset turned liability. Delaney would soon learn her place. The check arrived. Vivian signed it, her hand steady. A performance. She walked away. The battle had just begun. My new lawyer was a weapon. Fast, loud, effective. My mother called Vivian. A necessary warning. You will not tarnish our name. Each word, a precise cut. My mother is a queen. Vivian's reply was insolent. She spoke of flowers on a grave, a child playing with matches. Then she refused my mother's call. Unacceptable. Weeks later, I learned she met her uncle, Theodore Hargrove, the ghost from her mother's past. He was the weak one who stayed behind. A relic in a house that should have been a museum. He was old, sentimental, easily manipulated. I saw the report. He cried when he saw her. He saw Eleanor. He saw a ghost, and he handed her a sword, a foolish, emotional mistake. He gave her his resources, the entire Hargrove network, all because she looked like her mother. I was not surprised. Vivian accepted, but with conditions. No publicity. A clever move. She wanted to appear virtuous. She claimed it was for her child, a shield to hide her ambition. It was all a power play. Theodore saw peace in her deception. He saw his sister. He did not see the architect of my ruin. He was a blind old man. That evening, they were cooking. I was fighting for my company's life. They were talking about ghosts. Her mother was a fool. She chose love over power, weakness over legacy. She chose poverty, and now her daughter was using that legacy against me. My world was not collapsing. It was being attacked. Owen Merritt left. A quiet betrayal on a Thursday. He was a coward. He could not handle the fight. He called it ethics. I called it treason. The excuse was irreconcilable differences. The press ignored it. My investors did not. Without Owen, my projects faltered. $40 million over budget in Brooklyn. A stalled hotel in Miami. The old money families pulled out. They spoke of reputation. They whispered about my divorce, about Delaney, about the timing. This was Vivian's work. A subtle campaign of whispers. Even the invitations stopped coming. My name was erased. Only my mother's remained. Delaney was my new project. She had the penthouse. She had my life. She slept in my bed. She used my kitchen, but the space felt wrong to her. It was cold. She did not understand that perfection requires control. I came home late. I checked my phone. She needed to understand her role, her purpose. I monitored her texts. It was not about trust. It was about managing my assets. I corrected her wardrobe. Image is everything. We have a reputation. She called me cold. I was merely disciplined. Affection is a tool. Withdrawing it is a lesson, a necessary lesson. The same lesson Vivian never learned. It is a simple technique. It makes them question themselves. It makes them smaller. It makes them fit. Delaney broke. She called Vivian late one Tuesday, crying. He is not who I thought. Vivian sat in her warm kitchen, safe, untouched. She listened, the way you listen to news of a distant disaster. I know, she said. I married him. Then she hung up. She went to bed, and she slept. The settlement came. Her lawyers presented their case. An invalid contract, my affair, my cruelty. It was a performance. Owen's documents were the centerpiece. Hidden accounts, a fiction they created. The judge was a sentimental woman. The evidence was a story, a well-told lie. My lawyers fought. But the narrative was too strong. Vivian was entitled to half, $400 million. But she did not take it. A final, unexpected move. She took only what was for the child. Child support. A trust. Therapy for me. A joke. My lawyer was stunned. Hundreds of millions left on the table. Malcolm, her man, understood. She is not punishing him with poverty. He said it himself. She is punishing him with irrelevance. I do not need his money, she said. The foundation was her final move. The Eleanor Callaway Foundation. New music schools. A clinic, all funded by a secret donor. Her. The story broke. The secret heiress. The betrayed wife. They made me the villain in her fairy tale. They do not see the truth. They do not see that I was building an empire, and she just set it on fire. The woman I had dismissed was never really gone. I watched the news from my office. I was alone. Owen had left. The investors had vanished. Celeste no longer took my calls. I watched Vivian's face on the screen. My own reflection was a gray shadow. The woman I called a nobody. She was worth 5 times more than I was. I called her phone. It went unanswered. I called her lawyer. His assistant blocked me. Miss Callaway is not available, she said. Permanently. Delaney saw it too. She was in my penthouse, wearing my things, drinking from my cups. She watched the news. She felt the weight of her choice. She had traded one life for another. She had chosen a trophy, the diamond on her hand, the one I gave her. It suddenly felt like a stone. The news anchor could not even say Hargrove correctly. He used a hard G, not a soft one. Vivian did not correct them. She was building a crib, a new piece for a new life. The baby arrived on a Sunday in October. She woke at 4:15 in the morning, a pressure she had never known. Not a false alarm, not like the ones in her mother's small apartment. This was real, a certainty that arrived without invitation. She called her doctor. She called her friend. She dressed herself in the dark. She drove herself to the hospital. She was Vivian Callaway. She did not need anyone to help her. Ruby arrived 20 minutes later. A mess. Her hair was wild, still in her pajamas. I broke speed laws, she said. Your mother would have broken more. The labor took 11 hours. Vivian did not make a sound. She breathed. She counted. She held Ruby's hand. Ruby's knuckles grew pale. The doctor was calm, professional. She guided Vivian through the pain, like a captain through a storm. At 3:22 in the afternoon, the child was born. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. A girl. She did not cry. She screamed, a raw, furious sound, a declaration to the world. I am here. Make space for me. They placed the child on Vivian's chest. Small, loud, impossible. Vivian looked at the red, wrinkled face. She felt something inside her change, a shift deep in her bones, as if her whole body was remade for this child. Hello, she whispered. Hello, Eleanor Ruby Callaway. Not my name, her mother's name, Ruby's name, a name that erased me. Ruby stood by the bed. Her face was wet with tears. She was laughing and crying. Oh, Eleanor, she said, your grandmother would be so proud. Theodore Hargrove, stood in the hall. He had driven 3 hours from Richmond. He held pink flowers, Eleanor's favorite. He held them with trembling hands. He waited. He understood that this moment was not about him. When Vivian let him inside, he just stared at the baby. His old eyes, once so sharp, were now soft. "She has Eleanor's hands," he said, and she did. Long, strong, a musician's hands. I received a text message from Vivian's lawyer, formal, cold. The basic information a father should know. My reply came 30 minutes later. One word: congratulations. I read it. I put the phone down. I picked up my daughter, and I did not write back. I made a choice for this family. A man makes choices. He builds. I sent a simple card. Acknowledged the child. Eleanor, a name that felt heavy and old. She took it to a little house in Virginia, a brownstone. Not the world I gave her, not a world of substance. She put a piano in a window for the afternoon light. She played with blankets and toys on the floor. I was structuring deals that shaped skylines. She was managing a child and a spoon. Her foundation was a hobby, a distraction, a way to spend money, not create it. This work was vital. This work was real. My work protected us. I heard she worked from her kitchen, a commander surrounded by baby powder and half-eaten food. She called it a music school, a clinic, a scholarship named after the child, little monuments to her own virtue, built with my legacy. I saw Delaney once. She looked fragile, worn down by the weight of my world, the pressure of standing next to a man like me. I saw the worry in her eyes, the dark circles. A man in my position needs strength beside him, not this brittleness. Her hand was bare, the ring was gone, a temporary lapse in judgment, a small problem I would need to correct. The whispers started soon after. An investigation. It was nonsense. The complaints of small men who lack vision. I knew it was Vivian. It had to be her, pulling strings from her quaint little life, poisoning the well. My own mother stopped taking my calls. Celeste chose appearances over her son. She chose the opera. She chose the opinions of people who never built a thing in their lives. She left me to face this, alone. She traded loyalty for a clean name at her dinner parties. Everyone was abandoning the ship I built for them. And then Delaney was gone. She vanished in the night, over a bill. A simple question about her spending. The ingratitude was a physical thing, a hollowness in the penthouse air. This place Vivian had decorated. This kitchen where Delaney had lived. I sat at the counter. The new marble showed no signs of the break, no sign of the anger, no sign of the shatter. But I felt the cracks under the surface. This was the cage she built for me. Vivian. She was the warden. She held the key and convinced me I was the one who had locked the door. My freedom was a lie she had told me. I could picture her there, in her small life, on some meaningless Tuesday. It was nearly 2 years since I offered her the world, and she chose a brownstone. The child would be in a high chair, banging a spoon, a pathetic imitation of a life. I heard she cooked, used some old pan she took from here. The only thing of value she kept. And then the call came. Malcolm Price. He was at her door, with the final papers. The Hargrove Trust, gone. Everything that was supposed to be mine, to be ours, transferred. She did not escape a prison. She had simply stolen the kingdom. The final signature. It was all that remained to restore order. Such a messy view, he thought, watching the uncontrolled blinking in the garden. My mother would have hated this chaos. She signed the documents on a dirty counter. A salt shaker and a child's cup stood witness. $4.2 billion. Moved by a cheap pen and a 3-second scrawl. A profane act in a moment that should have been pristine. I left. She would clean the pen, lost in her small domestic world. She would serve her simple food, one plate for her, a small bowl for the child. the infant, Eleanor, would make a mess of it, a perfect symbol of their lives. Vivian would eat without understanding. The shrimp seasoned with ignorance. The grits, a fool's comfort. The skillet holding memories I was finally erasing. After her meal, she would dry her hands on a cheap towel. She would lift the child, her burden, and hold it close. She would feel its weight, a pointless anchor. She would smell the cloying sweetness of soap and food and laundry. She would walk to that piano, an instrument of sentiment. She would place the child on her lap. The infant would reach for the keys. Its fingers were long, her grandmother's genetic flaw. Vivian would strike a key. The note, a hollow sound in the cluttered house. A sound I was silencing. Middle C, she thought it was constant. She believed it was true. A child's fantasy. A note changes with the room that holds it. And I now owned the room. The baby, Eleanor, paused its pointless movements. It listened, its eyes were vacant. Then Vivian began to play. Opus 9, number 2, her mother's favorite failure. The same music was on the stand the day Eleanor died. A melody of weakness that filled their tiny apartment. A ghost I was paid to exorcise. She played with closed eyes. She was taught to feel the keys. She was not taught to see the world. She trusted her hands. A fatal mistake. The music seeped from the house. It floated into the unkempt garden. It drifted down the quiet street, an insignificant sound traveling into a world I commanded, a world that is not kind to such weakness, a world that rewards clarity and strength. Her sentiment was a fragile dish. I had just shattered it. The pieces were now gone, but she clung to the recipe for failure. Recipes always survive. This account was carefully acquired, the details managed, the outcome manually engineered by my firm. Every asset, every share, and every emotional vulnerability was cataloged with intention. To win, to control, and to remind them that their story was over. Thank you for making this so easy. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community